trauma is not that you were sexually assaulted. The trauma is not that you were raped, you were abused. That was traumatic, intensely painful, horrible. Should never have happened, but it did. That wasn't the trauma. The trauma is the wound that you sustained as a result. Those wounds show up in very similar ways across the board. So rather than focusing on the what happened, I mean, yeah, you need to recognize what happened, but rather than focusing on that, focus on what is the impact on me of what happened? What is the wound that I sustained? Where am I sensitive? That you touch that wound and it hurts? Or where did I develop scar tissue where I'm not flexible and I'm rigid and I don't feel? That's what you concentrate on. And there's no single way. But put the emphasis on the impact on you. Going over some therapists do this. They go over and over the event. Doesn't help. Ultimately doesn't help. Because what really happened, the wound is what happened to you, inside of you. Not what happened to you externally, but what happened inside you. Especially those of you that were sexually abused in childhood, you tend to believe that that was the original traumatic event. But I'm telling you it wasn't. Not that it wasn't traumatic, but it wasn't the original traumatic event. Because I've seen this, and I've done this a number of times. So I won't do it here just for lack of time, but I'll tell you about it. In any group that I talk with, and I'll say, for those of you that are willing to acknowledge that you were sexually abused as a child, put your hand up. 10, 15, 20, 30 people put their hands up. And I'll say, are some of you willing to talk with me? And they'll say, yeah. And I said, okay. How old were you when it happened? How long did it go on for? Oh, from 4 to age 8. Or it happened over a 2-week period. Whatever. And then I'll say, who did you talk to about it? And the answer is going to be 95% of the time, nobody. And then I'll say, well, if you had a child and somebody even looked them the wrong way, never mind touched them, who would you want them to talk to if you were the parent? And everybody says, well, I want my child to talk to me. And then I'll say, well, if you found out that this happened to your child over 4 years and she didn't talk to you about it or he didn't talk to you about it, how would you understand that? Not how would you feel about it. You'd feel horrified. But how would you understand it? Oh, they didn't trust me. In other words, by the time the abuse happened, that child was already cut off from the parent. And the perpetrator knew that. Because the bully energy, the perpetrator energy, knows exactly who's vulnerable. They can tell energetically. So this is not to blame the victim. It's not to say that you invited it or you deserved it or you did anything to bring it on. You didn't. At any age, or whenever it happened, none of that is true. But the perpetrator could tell that you were not protected, that you lacked that boundary. And that boundary would come from being nurtured and held and seen by adults and feeling safe. And the perpetrator energy, laser-like accuracy, can tell when that's absent. So the first trauma was not the abuse or the rape. In most cases, it was the loss of that protective energy where the perpetrator found their way. And when you talk to men who perpetrated child abuse and they're in therapy, they will tell you, oh, in a room of 20 kids, I can tell exactly. Because they can. So the original trauma was that loss of contact with the parent. So when you're working with these traumas of sexual violation, yes, you got to deal with that and look at the wound, but also look at how you lost contact.